Okay, hello everyone listening. My name's Seth Dellinger. This is the Embodied Dialogue podcast, and I'm here with Adriana Forte. And did I say your last name correctly?
Yeah, you said it correctly in the English accent style way.
The English accent style way. Well,
Yes.
Adriana runs an online operation called CLAB. I guess some of the work you do with clients in person might be a part of that, but I know Adriana as someone who's talking about a lot about the experience of men and women and how we interact in the world. And a point of convergence between the two of us, especially with what I like to talk about in terms of the musicality of being, is the question of rhythm. But whereas I might be thinking about it often in terms of like moment by moment, Adriana's really looking at the rhythms of our lives, I would say, how I understand it. Uh, the question of women's menstruation and educating people, especially men like me who, you know, what do I know about it? This has been one of the accents of your work, although it's not all of your work, but something that's really cool, I think, about what you're doing is that a lot of your work might appear to be for women, but you've made a big point about reaching out to men about this is what women's experience is all about. And I know you're writing a book. I know you have an online container of sorts. So that's just kind of some of the pieces. Anything else you want to just say at the beginning about C-Lab, about your work to add to what I just said?
First, thank you, Seth, for having me here. So fun to jam with you, and jamming feels appropriate because we're talking about rhythm. And um, I think that maybe the thing that I'd add is that so CLAB, the way that I worded it is CLAB, um, a cyclically informed society in the making. So it's a little bit boring. Maybe I'll come up with a different catchphrase at some point, but it's just because we're not cyclically informed yet. So we're like, if we use if we use the Zechstein or integral pre-tragic, tragic, post-tragic frame of like where we are in society in terms of like seeing things through recognition of cycles, I'd say we're in pre-tragic. So if we're in pre-tragic, then we can't harness it. Like it's just this unconscious, we're just unconsciously doing the rhythm of every day or whatever it is. And most people really caught up with their everyday. So the possibility of the musical spectrum becomes really narrow. And then I'm just trying to make it bigger by going like, what if we actually started recognizing that the rhythms have a particular pattern, and at some point they repeat this like, ascent and descent kind of, and then we can take that to the climate, to seasons, and I'm sure we'll talk about it. But so it's macro and micro all the way into the body.
Mhm.
And so that's where my playground is. It's like, and then because I do bring men and women because one thing that I think that society doesn't do very well is that we talk about masculine and feminine as if they're decontextualized things. Like men here, men are like this, the masculine is like this, the feminine is like this, or women are like this. And we are it's always contextual. It's always one in the face of the other. It's always how it's shaped. It's always so because the conversation doesn't happen um much, at least as far as I can see, like this. um we often we swing from one pendulum and then to the other one, and we go, women feel really abused, then we do me too, and men feel really apologetic, and then so anyway, and of course we've come from a lot of oppression in some fronts with women, so then there's that charge over there. So I think the lenses of rhythm, and that's the last thing I'll say, the lenses of rhythm and cycles, I feel that not only they give information, but also they automatically snap me out of the drama triangle. I'm not so interested in the drama triangle, even though it's true. Like the drama triangle being like the victim, perpetrator, rescuer thing that we do when we're in kind of fight and flight. So a lot of solutions and accusations happen from within that constrained, that that container of the of a nervous system that is in survival, let's say. And that would really tie with your work and bodies, people's bodies. But so for me, I'm going like, I know we're not in that place as humanity. I know we're not, we are in a place of a lot of contraction and we're like this, but I feel I need to play in a playground, assuming what if we weren't? It's almost hypothetical because we're not there. But what if we weren't? And then so we can dream um, a way of relating that is not tick for tack and like I did this, you did that, because it's less interesting and less creative. And from that place, also because the rhythm and the cycles language is not it's not a language that is tied to the psyche. It's not a it's something that's beyond, maybe beyond or outside of the psyche. So people can suspend judgment, because if I say there is a rhythm, a particular rhythm that is being favored by modernity, I'm not saying that rhythm is bad. I'm just saying if it's too much of that rhythm, then there is only one pulse, there's only one tone. So that's what I'm kind of trying to get people to attune to. And yeah, sometimes with success, sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
kind of.
Mm-hmm.
Mm,
Well, I think anyone listening would agree that we're in a time period of massive change.
mm,
And yeah, I hear you talking about kind of like a future that we could live into. I think it feels right to me that in a time period like this, imagining other ways things could be and just asking that question is a really useful lens, no matter what. But just maybe to start, somewhere that feels like it would help listeners come more into your work. You have a video that you've put out, which is just a very kind of simple. There's a circle graphic, and you explain a woman's cycle, and then you also explain the seasons, right? You explain the seasons, the the planet going around the sun, and then you also explain the stages of a woman's life. The 40 years of the cycle, but also before and after, and you make some connections there. I don't. It was a while back that I listened to it, but a lot of it feels just very, in some ways, basic. Like, okay, I haven't thought about it, but of course I'm aware of these things. But just the simple pointing and saying, hey, look, this is how things work, and what if we all were just very aware of that?
mm,
So if part of what you're doing is just let's say education, and you're
mm,
just wanting men and women to have a clearer understanding of the natural cycles of biology and um, the larger cycles of how our planet uh, changes, like the different times of the year and the cycles of life. If we all sort of knew that already, uh, what would be different? Like, what do you see just in terms of clarifying the basic rhythms of life that I don't think anyone would argue are there, but somehow
mm,
have been pushed
mm,
below the level of most of our consciousness in a way in this
mm.
in modernity.
Yeah. I I think when I had a conversation with Lehman a while ago, I think he asked me that question and I was just like, huh, I don't know. And I have to, and the reason I say I don't know, it's because I could make up a lot of scenarios. I
Mm-hmm.
could hypothesize,
Mm-hmm.
but because we're not there yet, and because we're in the brunt of things, like we are in this moment, like so, for example, and I'm not gonna run away from your question. Maybe we'll come back to it. I'll just explain a little what I see. So what I the word that I'm using to talk about this is cycle dysphoria. So I'm like came up with a word saying cycle dysphoria because it feels better to me than patriarchy. So patriarchy gives a lot of assumptions. A lot of people understand what it's meant, but there's a lot of things that are put into the basket of patriarchy, and it gets a lot of very confusing. Then some people talk about capitalism or talk about, there's a lot of oppressive structures, and these oppressive structures, I'm diagnosing like, so I'm using the frame of modernity. So in the book, I'm using modernity as Vanessa, the writer of Vanessa Machado, I think, the writer of Hospicing Modernity, she uses the term modernity. She personifies it like as if it's a person. So she gives these traits and personality. And so I'm using it, I'm borrowing that from her because I think it's the best possible. And then I'm diagnosing modernity uh, with cycle dysphoria. So modernity has cycle dysphoria, which is an incapacity to see cycles. And what does that, and different people will have that incapacity show up in different ways. So for women, the fact that we have the cycles within us, just like the digestive systems, not quite, because we see menstruation. Some of us can feel ovulation or feel, the mucus change, but a lot of us don't. A lot of us only notice the menstrual blood. So when a lot of women just notice the menstrual blood, and then you have culture just talking about menstrual blood and then helping, which is great, is necessary, helping with, let's make tampons or pads accessible in third world countries, let's help in this way or that way. That's all super important, but the focus again is on menstruation. A lot of people conflate menstruation with the menstrual cycle. So again, we're seeing a line, and then we're seeing a blip in the line. And it's that mental construct that's not real, but that we internalized as if it's real, that is a problem. So for women, that creates a split in their psyches. Like, and now I can say that with more confidence, because this comes from Seth, 15 years of knocking my head against the wall and going, how come I'm seeing this, and how come is it so hard to convey? Like, what is it? What is it? And then looking at the distinctions of, like, inverted commas, this pathology that I'm calling psychodysphoria, and then going, oh, it manifests in our bodies differently. So if you are a woman and you have let's say, for the best analogy is the seasons, and of course it has more nuance to it, but let's say you have this ascent of estrogen, which is a different flavor. So even in the most simplistic way, estrogen is a different flavor than progesterone. They're very different beings. They have very different energies. So even on this simple level, if a woman is trying to be the same, or if she imagines herself that she can do a linear job every day of the month, she is going to have cycle dysphoria, because she's forcing a whole cyclicity, a whole expression of her into a very small, um, explanation of herself, and she fits into it because not only that's the feedback. I call that the broken mirror kind of syndrome, because if you have a mirror always telling you how you are, it's like gaslighting, but on a massive scale. If you have the whole world saying that you're linear, not like that, but expecting you to be linear, talking about menstruation as if it's a drop in the line, if you have a 9 to 5 job every day, if you're running on cortisol and adrenaline every day of the month, like all of that, and then you have our solutions for our problems, making us not cyclical, like the pill, which actually makes us not cyclical. Lots of pills make us not cyclical. So then you start creating a society that actually is becoming a new type of human that is super disconnected from rhythm and cycles. So to go back to your question is like, I think that because of the complexity of cycle dysphoria and the way it manifests, I go like, I have no idea what it could be. Like if we were living in that way, I can only tell you what it feels for me when I can be that way, which is there's tremendous release of creative energy. And and I can create much more because there's too much energy being put into fitting in self um self-esteem, because of course if a woman is not, if she's cyclical and she's trying to apologize herself every time she's not meeting the standards of this line, this hypothetical crazy line, she's apologizing for herself a lot of the time. And when she's apologizing for herself a lot of the time, there's a lot of energy that instead of being like, wow, I'm just like this, it's like, I'm like this today, I'm wrong.
Mm.
And then because we're cyclical and the process is inside of us, the woman's psyche can loop in itself. So instead of creating a spiral, so there's a spiral in potential. Like there's a potential of a spiral of growth and more potential. Like that's what I see. And that's what I see in me, in myself, and women that are freer, not completely free, freer in their context, like in their worlds and in themselves, there's more creative capacity, and that's just more interesting. And then, you know, if you, let's say if you trigger me in something, I have much more bandwidth to be curious and interested and go like, oh wow, Seth, you said something and it doesn't land at all for me, but that's interesting because that's how you live. So I'm not making it wrong, I'm just going, I'm curious, you know, it's a different space that opens up. So if I zoom out and I go like, imagine if we could live like that in groups of more generosity in our bodies and minds, then I think it would be just nicer and
Yeah,
maybe
yeah,
more
yeah,
creative.
totally. Well, what I heard in your answer, it would be funny to go back to the recording and see what were the words I used to ask you the question. I told you that as I was thinking of our conversation and I was asking myself if I was prepared, you know, in different ways. I remembered, you know, previous conversations with you that we didn't record where you would often pause and just like point out the energies. And sometimes you would say, well, you're being very linear, but of course that's natural for you. But I was listening, you did a conversation with your friend Amanda recently, and at some point, the two of you were talking about two women talking together, and you were saying something about this isn't necessarily very intellectual, but that, you know, I love how this feels and the importance of that. And you told some of the story of growing up, um, your father, your stepfather, and what it was like as a young girl to sort of, it sounds like, I mean, you got certain messages like the ones you've been talking about here, but I could already hear in your story that you had this real curiosity about, oh, why is it that, you know, women live this kind of life and men live that kind of life, and opened up. But yeah, so if I just asked you a question that sort of was like, I don't know, putting us in a mental frame, what I actually heard in your answer was talking a lot about what you're calling cycle dysphoria leads to a diminishment of what we feel, that there's a certain
Mm.
numbness that becomes normalized. And then if we can open that up, and if a woman can feel more of it, and you know, I presume if, you know, her husband or other men who are nearby have a more embodied understanding of what's happening for this woman in this moment versus this moment. Yeah, you were describing also a larger palette of feeling, right? And
Mm.
so if some feeling that I have, whatever it is labeled a wrong feeling, well,
Mm.
as you explained, I'm going to, you know, try to present to you something different than what's actually in my body. And of course, that's going to inhibit me. And even though I haven't been thinking, you know, about the same questions as you, in my world, it just sounds like, oh, well, that's extra effort. That's, you
Mm.
know, and that's you know, making me associating my own identity with being wrong. It contracts my whole life in so many ways. And then I start performing rather than just doing what I would do naturally, which tends to be something that has more to do with feeling than
Mm.
necessarily let me plan the right thing to say, let me plan the right thing to do. So I was just appreciating, you know, in the work that I do, often like just a simple body scan. You know, someone who
Mm.
doesn't pay attention to their body very much, you ask them to notice all the parts of their body one by one, and it's not very complicated, but so much changes just because attention was brought to this, and now I feel something different. And because I feel something different, I can be in the world in a new way. But the whole particular question that you've really dedicated your life to exploring, for me, coming from thinking about embodiment all the time, it was like, oh my gosh, this is even for me, this is really obvious, and yet I've never really considered this.
Mm,
Even talking to my daughter, and she tells me, she's 16, she has cramps, you know, and like for the longest time, that word didn't, I didn't even, I was just like, huh, that's too bad that, and it was
mm,
just like, how could I fail to understand? Like, so now I just have very simple conversations with her, but I'm like, oh, is something going on with your cycle? Do you need, can
mm.
I get anything to help? But it's just like, at least I know to ask. But it's kind of like amazing to me that I didn't know to ask, before, because it's not rocket science.
But also, you have to think that, I was talking to my brother, I was talking to some men, and they've never talked, like they've never seen their moms. It's the lineages is
Mhm.
in some way, it's almost as if like there are two ways I can talk about it. One way is like that's women's work, and women should know about this and not men. So in some tribes that would be the case. Like in Aboriginal culture, there's lots of women's work separate the men's work. But I say that in the times of modernity, we are already inevitably a collective tribe composed of men and women. It's not real that if we do men's work and women's work separately, I think there is a place to that when we correct our mistaken assumptions, because I think we have a lot of mistaken assumptions of the other. So, for example, when a woman talks about her like her premenstrual um be what's happening in her mind, what's happening in her emotions, what's happening in her body, if she just gets a roll of the eyes like you're just premenstrual, we're not actually attuning to what's happening in that body, and opening our viewfinder or our lenses to go like, huh, if a bunch of women, not just one, a lot of them, most of them go through something at this time of the month, and then they don't, it's something else at a different time. What are the constraints that certain women are having to put up with to live in a particular way? And this is not even like when women have like endometriosis and massive um uh let's call it pathologies. I don't like the word, but let's call it just for sake of understanding. Actually, a lot of them hide. They hide because from the workplace, because if they disclose, they're going to be more of an inconvenience to be hired. They're already seen in the model of capitalism to be an inconvenience because they have children. It's so upside down. What we put at the center of what's valuable is so upside down that that's one of the things that I'm really trying to do with CLAB. It's almost like I see myself as just doing different experiments to just put different things at the center. Like, what have we been putting at the center of our gaze with modernity? And what happens if we put a mother and a baby? What happens if we put an older woman? Like, what is she gonna inform us to care about? Because she wouldn't let us kill all the animals. She wouldn't. If what she cares about is at the center, then we wouldn't be consuming more than we can with the earth. So hold on, I forgot where you start. Oh, the body scan. I like because I just marked when you said about the body scan, I marked cycle scan. It's I like that frame cycle scan because it's almost like it is guiding our attention to something that usually if you don't guide your attention there, you don't notice.
Mhm.
Because everything about modernity is taking our attention away from it. So caffeine, all the sports that we do, which are go, 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 the video games, social media, everything's, it's like zooming. I often think about these things when I'm riding my bike in the valley here where I live. And when I ride my bike, I often notice that when I ride downhill, which I love, and super fast. I can't see the details of anything. It's just like, and of course, one mistake is fatal because it's like it's so quick. That's how it feels. Like modernity feels like that to me. And and the cycle dysphoria lens is going like, what's the benefit of doing the things that we don't want to do? Like, we can't just go downhill all the time. Like there is the uphill to have to feel the downhill you have, and then you can look at the details of the trees and the detail of the little bug because you're going so slow. So it's kind of I think I love your and I see the overlap of our work for sure with the body awareness, and I wouldn't imagine that you um would have to know about it, because what I experience is that men often in my world, men are often really curious about it and very open, and they can cognitively empathize really quickly. So they go like, yeah, that makes absolute sense. Whereas women, I experience a two, like a fork on the road, and maybe there's more variables of the fork in the road. Some women, when there's a readiness in their body, either they pregnant, they had a baby, or they had a problem in pregnancy, or they had something in which they were met with their animal body. They had to meet their animal body. Or they couldn't give birth. I'm using inverted commas here if people are not seeing the video. Like, they are trying to control birth with their heads, and it's your monkey that gives birth, it's your body, it's your animal body. A lot of us modern women, we're disconnected from that type of energy. So when birth is a place where that happens for women a lot, and menopause is another time, or daughters with problems or situations. So these are the times where women sometimes might wake up to this naturally, and they go like, oh my God, wow, where have I been? And that was in some ways my wake up call happened in wanting to get pregnant and going like, huh, I can't believe I didn't live with this awareness before, but I was really open to it. And then there's another group of women that are either super successful they made their lives really successful in the constant, in the, in not the constant, the current frame of modernity. They have made it work. And some of these women, actually, their gift to the world is possible in the constraints of modernity. Like they're still contracted, they still have cramps, they're still not expanded completely, they still have negative self-talk when they're oscillating, so they're still there. But somehow they were able to thrive in some bits that feels exciting to them. So or they're postmenopausal, so then they're just like, I'm done with them, that I don't even need to look back and see what I didn't see. So these women might have more of a resistance because some of I had friends and other people, the way they were describing to me, and makes absolute sense, is like, it feels like saying that I haven't seen that and that's happening is like saying that I'm less of a woman, or saying that I failed as being a woman. And I'm like, wow, that's really painful and hard. And that's the last thing that I'd like a woman to feel, is that they're less of a woman because they hadn't consciously become attuned to that. So
Mhm.
um, I would even say that for a lot of women, they wouldn't need to be attuned to it consciously, um, if we lived in a world that supported us. You know what I mean? Like if we lived in a world, so for example, I'll give you an example of why it's important for women to wake up to that consciously nowadays. It's because we have men and women that have disconnected from that, going through medical school and amplifying a mechanistic worldview of medicine, for example, that really doesn't align with the female body and doesn't even test things in the female body so much. And anyway, so we have the whole um, gynecological, you have gynecology and you have psychiatry, for example. You have these two schools in medicine that I'd say that if you have more women that live, understand the rhythm of their bodies and go like, oh my goodness, how did we do that to each other? How, okay, let's grieve this for a moment, and now let's regroup, and let's kind of create a medicine in which the doctor is not just overriding the woman's will, or not just coming with a solution, because she comes to the doctor, for example, a pregnant woman, she's new as a mother. She's never been a mother before. She's scared. She's a product of modernity. So she's conditioned by the expert, like, more than me. There's a guy with a white coat or a woman with a white coat. She hasn't fostered this connection with her body, which because you do this kind of work. And then this doctor tells her, oh, sorry, like you can't really give birth naturally because there's something with it's something a little bit off with your pregnancy. If she doesn't educate herself massively, which takes tremendous effort and hours of reading, which a lot of pregnant women don't want to be doing, she will believe him. And if she believes him, then she's already going like, oh yeah, like I couldn't give birth naturally, which I hear a lot. And but these women, when they tell me why, the reason, if I sit with a lot of midwives, they say, no, that why is not even true. That's not even true. It's the belief system of the current medical model, which is more mechanistic. So these are the things that if women don't start going like, huh, we're in a bit of a pickle. Maybe we need to attune to this. I would say just live your life, and estrogen is a trusting hormone. It's made to trust, so just go with the flow. But if we go with the flow of modernity, it's not serving us. It's not serving our girls. So that's where
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up. So you have, I think, more than one post on the CLAB. There's a Substack, and we'll put the other information for listeners so they can follow up. But for anyone who's listening, if you go and you read, and there's some video as well about, I think it's the story of your second pregnancy, where
Yeah.
you really found yourself sort of, am I going to follow what the experts are saying, or am I going to, follow what I'm feeling in my body? And everything you were just describing is like the story of the birth of my daughter, who
Mm,
in the end, this was a C-section. And I remember being with the gynecologist, who was a man. And I remember, we had one visit and we had another, and there was the expected due date. And I remember one time he said, it's time to have this baby. Just like,
mhm,
and
mhm,
I think it was basically like, you know, we're concerned because you've missed the date. And not that I'm rejecting out of hand that there might be some wisdom in that. It was just sort of delivered as a fact, and we were sort of like, okay. And then the experience in the hospital. I mean, you talk about the woman who's never been a mother, and I had never been a father, so I felt pretty ignorant too. And I was very much like, well, what are they telling us to do? And my daughter's mother had a certain medication where breastfeeding wasn't possible, because the medication would have been harmful to the baby. So, so it was bottle feeding. But then when we left the hospital, there was specific instructions we were given about how much milk and how often. And
mhm,
there's a certain shame that would come up as I look back, but I even remember being in, discussion with my wife, like, well, it's not time yet. Okay, the
mhm,
baby's crying, but the experts essentially told us what the schedule is, and we have to, and it just seems like madness looking back. But in that moment, I can speak for myself that I was kind of scared of doing anything wrong, right? Um, so I wanted to tell that story, and it would be great to, if you want to share more of your stories, but to highlight that I think part of what you're doing here, um, even if we zoomed way out, is you're saying, look, it's time to have a conversation that none of us
mhm,
actually know how to have. This is a conversation we've never had before. I mean, I'm
mhm,
excited to be with you, and we've spoken before, and I'm like, go Adriana, so I want to be here. but even this conversation feels so
Mm,
different than so many other. I can feel how out of my element I am, or
mhm,
even if, well, just so many ways. And the other thing I really appreciated that you said earlier is you compared modernity to sort of like, past cultures, let's say, of different kinds. But you're not saying we're going back. You're saying we're going forward to something new, and this is where we find ourselves.
mm,
In short, I think the story that I was just telling and some of what you were telling is we can probably point to dozens of ways in this day and age that we can simultaneously feel, if I do X, Y, and Z, then I'll be doing it the right way according to what I've been told. And at the
mm,
same time, it's a very different thing I would do so it would feel right, so it would land in my body. So there's a way that like what resonates and what feels good and feels natural becomes countercultural. So
mhm,
if I want to take care of myself, part of it is like I have to be prepared to like battle the narratives. And it's just like, how did we end up here? But this is
mm.
where we are. So I just wanted to really underline that I think it's just courageous to even begin these conversations, but it really does feel vital.
I love what you just said. You said a few things that sparked me, and now I'm forgetting. But I'll just say, um, so this is another thing that I'll make a point. I'll underline here. So I'm perimenopausal, which the brain literally rewires itself in
Mhm.
the same way that it rewires itself in adolescence. So, but different. It's different configuration. And in matrescence, so you have adolescence, matrescence, so when a new mom becomes a mom, and in pregnancy, and then menopause. And part of this rewiring, seriously, is like you're going like blank, sometimes like blank. And then I go, how did women, did we just fool everybody pretending in the corporate that this wasn't happening for like years? Like, what were the women of the past generations doing? Because if they were not talking, now we're all talking about menopause, it's like in the zeitgeist. But I'm like, what were the other women doing um, with the rite of passage that's happening, and how we coexisting? And the way I see, like, if I didn't have, for example, trust in you, and if I wasn't doing the work that I do, that makes it a point to make this visible. If I was just giving a talk that I was expected to be professional, inverted commas, I'd be like, oh my God, I forgot what he said. And how do I do? And all of that would just dilute my creative spark. So anyway, that's one little caveat. So I did forget a lot of what you said, but there's one thing that you said, which was that I'll try to retrieve with time. It's funny because sometimes they come in a completely different way. But I loved what you said about you worded it in a different way, but you said something out of my depth. Like we have had multiple conversations, both of us, and you're saying that this conversation feels different and that you're maybe out of place, out of your depth or something. I don't know what the word that you used, but I'd say that this is so important, and I love that you said that because I feel that a lot of us are afraid of saying that,
Mm.
and especially men. So what happens is in my little dance with women and men is that I say, some of the conversations are we're more similar than different, which I'm like, yes, we can take that perspective, but let's use the color palettes in a moment to help us gaze different. If I'm painting my wall and I put lots of different tones of yellow, if I look at them like this, each isolated, I can't distinguish the difference. They're very similar. And I go like, yeah, they're very similar. When I put them side by side, I go like, oh my goodness, this here is much more orange. This here is much more green. There's like tones of green. There's a tone of orange. I think we haven't been putting side by side what we do to the other in front of the other.
Right.
And I think that when we don't do that, what happens is if you are showing up here as an expert and um and just really trying to speak in a different way, I would think that you know, because in my conditioning, I told that to a lot of men, like, and it's funny because my partner has really helped me deconstruct that in the micro of my life. But then I checked with a lot of men one on one, and then I checked with women, and then I was like, oh my God, this is a phenomena. This is a phenomena of like projection. So when a guy offers a solution and of something, and if he speaks in a particular tone, a lot of women, if you imagine the psyche of a woman that is not linear, but she doesn't know it's not linear, and she believes herself to be linear. Look at how confusing this is. Like, we believe ourselves to have a very similar psyche, but a man has the consistency of testosterone. It's the same hormone every day. It peaks with cortisol, it lowers at the end of the day. Every day the same. It interacts with the world in different ways. He'll have surges of testosterone if he watches a football game or whatever, like a sport. He'll have surges of testosterone when he sees a beautiful woman, whatever. So there's that. After sex, but it's consistent, it's kind of always there. And of course it decreases with age, but it decreases gently for men, whereas for women it's different again. But women don't have a consistency of a hormone like that. So our psyches is much more like the moon. If you look at the moon every day, you see that the moon is changing every day. Every day. There's not the same moon in the sky, ever. So the way we internalize that is like, I'm confused. I'm unsure, because it's less the same than when compared to something that's more the same. Of course, this other person is also not the same, because we're always changing, we're always humans. But if we compare side by side, this one has more consistency than this one. This one is more like this. So this one kind of almost like, if this one speaks with certainty, this one believes it knows, because for this one to speak with that certainty, like, even for me, I've been researching that stuff for like 15 years, and you wouldn't see me going like, I know for sure. Like, it's so not it's so not natural. So when somebody says I know for sure, I go like, wow, based on my psyche, if this person says they know for sure, they really know for sure. What I have found is that they don't. Is that they're just, that's how they present truth. So then I'm like, oh my God, I projected certainty every time my partner was like, I'll fix the pipe. And I'm like, okay. And then he goes and he gives it a go. And then all of a sudden, there's water spurting everywhere. And I'm like, did you know how to fix the pipe? He's like, no. And I'm like, but you said I'll fix the pipe. And he said, well, but I just find out as I try. And I'm like, but you said I'll fix it. Why don't you say, I'll I'll think about how I'm gonna fix the pipe? He's like, because that's not how it works for me. So then over time, when I did a lot of that, and then I took that to my meta conversations, I was just like, huh, that's how a particular psyche works. And then you can see the variations. And for some women, some women, a lot of what women say to me, like for example, in my women's circles, and I was running women's circles, when women have to introduce themselves, they hate putting themselves into a box. They're like, I don't know how to fit myself into a box. I feel like I'm always changing. So a lot of women, they know it. They know internally. But somehow they they think humans have that more than just women, or they think that, it's a mistaken, like we have mistakenly understood the other. And then the last thing to that is that what happens is not just the beautiful things with men, because in some ways we might give men more credit and like really believe them. So when the stereotype of the really trusting young woman that goes and has an interview with a experienced man, and he says he sees her and she's an amazing thing or whatever, she believes, and she's like, okay, I'll do whatever. So you can have that, and me too can have the distortions of that. You can have that happen. But also another, oh my God, now my thought went blank halfway through my narrative. Let me think of where was I going with? I was going somewhere very interesting.
Well,
Extremely.
I'll
You
add
you
something
you
just from my side of,
have,
before I made a comment. Oh,
wait.
you want to jump back in? Okay.
Just because it's gonna
Go for
escape.
it.
It's gonna escape. The last thing that I want to say is that in the same way that we project beauty, we project negative projection onto men.
Mhm. Right.
Because we assume more similarity than difference in some areas. So if a guy is like with a father and mother thing, like in the same way that a man might be completely oblivious to her cycle in business, whatever, she might assume that he needs to be attuned to fathering in this, to being a father in the same way that she's attuned to mothering. But she's got hormones in a particular way that make her attuned. Like the mama lion is a different cocktail of hormones. He doesn't have that. He will have something else. If he starts being a very present father, he will decrease in testosterone and he will, but it's still different. So a lot of women might be impatient with men in certain areas as if like, oh, I can't believe he didn't notice that. And I'm like, why did you assume that his makeup would have him understand that? What made you assume that? If you're a bunch of women are just bad talking their partners, if all of them they have the same problem, why are they assuming that the guys are really trying to be whatever, oblivious? Or you know what I mean? Like there's something that we miss both ways.
Yeah. Well, something I've always appreciated about you is it seems that for all of the work you've put into understanding these different perspectives, these different energies and rhythms, you're coming from this place of compassion, right? Like I hear you in this place, just imagining what it must be like for the man and saying, well, you know, he's just not going to be capable of that perspective, which doesn't mean that make it okay that men do certain things through their ignorance. But even choosing to use the phrase cycle dysphoria instead of patriarchy, I think was, because that term is so loaded at this point. But it was interesting because earlier when I sort of said a bunch of things all at once, and you said, well, there's a lot there. Part of what happened for me is I thought, oh, have I done it again? Have I said too many things? Because this is something that, even with my partner, you know, we've had this dynamic and we've been together for a little over 8 years right now. But especially in the early going, there was like, how much do I talk and how much does she talk? And how much does each of one of us get to talk? And who decides that? And how does it happen? And is it okay? And
Mm,
we're also in this time period where, and I think we can see like the massive changes that have begun, this year with the changed administration in the US. It really kind of highlights this. But so there are, just try to use simple language, but there are very traditional ideas of
mm,
gender roles or of masculine and feminine. But then, in my family growing up, which is a very liberal family, I was actually never encouraged to be manly, right? It was kind of like, for me, I remember one of the awkward things for me when I got interested in girls was like, if I'm attracted to a girl or if I want to ask her on a date, I hope it doesn't seem like I'm harassing her. Whereas, like
mm,
all kinds of other men, it's probably not even crossed their mind. I had this one a, just girlfriend, not we weren't romantic, a girl who was my friend, and I was just sort of complaining because like I don't know what to say, and she was just said something like, well, if we think you're attractive, it's not harassment, but if if we don't, then you're harassing. And I was just like, what? And then I was trying to figure that out. But in any case, we're in this place where definitions are actually all over the place too.
mm.
And so what I appreciate is you're just saying, look, we do all see things differently. What would it be like for us to not necessarily battle it out and the person who has the best argument wins, but just what would it mean for us to really see that each one of us has a different point of view? So that's what I was really noticing there.
I think it's yes. First, I'll say yes to all of that. And I think I'm actually still zooming into the, yes, we all have a different point of view. And I'm zooming into a particular pattern. Like I think that before, and why I'm doing this is like, it's almost like a neuro musician. It's like if there, let's say the cycles are an instrument. And if we always overlook a particular instrument, then when we're composing the musical piece, that one, we won't include that one. And I'm making a point to go, yes, we are all different. Yes, there's trans people, there's nuance, there's the walker in between worlds, there's all of that. And if you have a body that runs on testosterone, and if you have a body that runs on estrogen and progesterone, just that oscillatory, the lens that I'm favoring, even though we have the extrovert invert, you can have lots of other lenses. The lenses that I'm looking at is male female biology, because I go like, we're dancing together, we dance together to make children, and we dance together to make the world. And we're dancing together based on a premise that we're more similar than different, and we're all different very quickly without going like, there is a pattern. We're all different, but these rhythm here, they're like the tambourines, and this is the strings, like it's different. So, and if we don't attune to that, then it's a problem. And when I have trans friends, it's really fun because a trans person, like I use the frog metaphor, even though the frog is not. I've heard that the tree frog metaphor might not even be a real metaphor because the tree frog might not be. Have you heard the tree frog metaphor that the jumps out of the boiling water? So the when if you put a frog in boiling water, it jumps out. But if you actually put a frog in water and start increasing the temperature,
Right,
it
right, sure. Yeah.
drowns, it dies. So I'm not even sure if that's an accurate thing, but it's a good metaphor to say that a trans conversation with a trans person sometimes is easier than a conversation with a person that just has a normal biological rhythm and has overridden that rhythm for a long, long time,
Hmm.
because the trans person has a larger amount of hormones. So it's much more, the distinction is very big. If a person had testosterone for 30 years of their lives, and all of a sudden they're cycling estrogen and progesterone, they go like, holy smokes, this is very different. And the same if a person was cycling estrogen and progesterone, but kind of like bypassing, like as a woman, as a woman, not knowing that that's a thing, maybe considering themselves to just be, if you're a teen and you're just seeing the fluidity in yourself and you don't have a different frame, you can go like, I'm gender fluid because I'm fluid because that's what a woman is in some way. So you can have that problem happening. But then if you have this person taking testosterone, they go like, oh my God, the world is completely different. And over time, it rewires the brain because the communication with the hormones in the brain is phenomenal. It actually rewires the pathway. So, this friend of mine, a trans man now, says, now I drive differently. I feel like I'm one with the car. I never felt like, I didn't feel like that before. Like this love that a lot of men feel for the car is like an extension of me. Like I can appreciate a car, but I can't imagine how it feels to have that.
Hmm.
And when he was describing the distinction, I was just like, huh. And my trans woman friend, when she describes her distinctions now, like for example, when she's really stressed out, she's like, I can't listen to these lengthy podcasts. I can't do it. Like it's too much to my mind. It's not that she's stupid. It's not that she's super clever, but she's saying something. She's saying like there's a phase in a woman's cycle. There's some phases in her cyclicity that actually she is more stressful. She's more full of stress. Like cortisol is um not brushed off easily. So having to grasp things in a particular way in that phase of the cycle is no. But a lot of women force. But if they don't force and they just go like, can't do it. And because she wanted to become a woman, so there's this longing. So when what do I see as a trans person? even with all the problems, you know, there's a lot of problems there. We can go into like there's a lot of trans kids. They're probably not trans kids and they're just facing teenagerhood. There's a lot of things going on there that maybe we can unpick at some other point. But the ones that actually, you know, lived an adult life as with this mismatch, and they decide to transition, they're deciding from a longing. They're going like, whatever you have, even though I don't really know, I relate to that. I relate to my concept of it. There's something that I want that you, other gender, has. So it's aspirational. So when this person comes and inhabits this aspirational persona, they're more generous, and they have then the cocktail of hormones that are really strong. Whenever they feel the differences, instead of going like, oh, I hate this like niggly sensation. Like this friend of mine says, wow, I feel more bitchy in my fights than angry like a man. There's a bitchiness edge. And I'm like, that's amazing that you can distinguish that, because most women, we would feel so, we're feeling so defensive of our ways of being, that if somebody says they were being bitchy, we're like, but men are bitchy too. You know, like we constantly like excusing, as opposed to going, that's interesting. So what is the distinction of this flavor of anger and this flavor of anger,
Mhm.
and this flavor of confidence and this flavor of confidence? So yeah, these are the things that kind of um come up for me, and I really appreciate, and I really love exploring with some trans people because of the boiling water factor. Like it's dramatic enough in their perception that they can tell with very, it's water and earth for them. It's like heaven and earth. Whereas for us, it is a subtle sensibility. We need to be attuned. And another thing that women have lost, I mean, modernity has kind of robbed us, and that's why I have to put the intellectual component for women. Like, you need to learn this new frame, because if a woman has too much cortisol running, then progesterone, which theoretically is a calming hormone, so it's something that should in its in nature calm a woman, is when, like, PMS is when a woman should be peaking in progesterone. So it's a calming hormone, right? So that's interesting. That's
Mm.
interesting. A lot of us are not feeling really calm, but a lot of us don't know that we're not reacting to progesterone itself. We're reacting probably to a lack of enough progesterone, because cortisol puts us into a fight and flight. And then if we're always in survival, the sex hormones are not the priority. The priority is to survive. So even our cocktail of hormones is being messed. You know, the cocktail is not doing its thing. So
Mhm.
then that's why I'm having to introduce this to women, and there's other people doing that, to go um, start start looking at yourself and start tracking yourself for a year, and start seeing if there is a pattern. And then after that, because then a lot of women get trapped in the everyday of that. So instead of also looking from a broader perspective, a lot of women stay in the um, you know, our minds can co-opt everything. Our modern minds can co-opt everything. So the mind can go, today I am in the winter of my cycle. I should be feeling this. Today I'm feeling this. So you can almost like not be in your body, because you can tell yourself, you know what I mean? So there's lots of
Right.
ways
It's
that
like
the
you're
dysphoria,
imposing the knowledge on to figure
exactly,
out what I'm feeling or something like that.
exactly. But it's almost like a stepping stone. We need to go like, we are modern people. We're going to try to co-opt this, and we're going to try to read the map as if it's the territory, because the mapping of the cycle is only the map, is it's not the territory. The territory is eventually, you can drop that, and you can just, if you're really comfortable with your cycle and with yourself and with the relationships you've got, and you start establishing new agreements, then at some point you don't need to be telling people like, I'm like this because I'm PMSing. I'm like this because I'm menstruating. It's like when I'm doing this, I'm disclosing almost as training wheels for culture because, we can just live as humans with generosity towards the other. But because we're not like that yet, then I feel like I have to put subtitles in my experience. And,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, my experience has been that working with embodiment and just understanding better what I feel in my body, or
mhm,
we use that, what does it go back to Socrates or something, just that phrase, know thyself, right? Like if I actually know what's happening with me, from there I can have more choice. So on the one
mhm,
hand, this is what's going on. Um, you know, like it's one thing to be angry, it's another thing to have a clear idea of why it makes sense that I would end up being angry in this moment because of how I know myself, what the situation is. And then, that, so, I mean, I don't know exactly what it looks like when you're working with women who are your clients. That might be interesting to hear a little bit about. But what I'm kind of guessing, just as I listen to you and you're describing, like, something that really did something to me when you said, there's this one cycle that's changing, and then for the man there's this sort of like you were with your hands, you were drawing these shapes in the air, and then I was seeing them side by side and saying, yeah, okay, so that's that there's difference, but there's something that's actually quite predictable too. It's a dynamically moving thing. Um, but as you're talking, I'm imagining in your own life and maybe with some of the women you've worked with, there is a process of starting to make more and more distinctions. And my assumption is that the more distinctions I have, the more it gives me agency. I mean, I'm wondering, it would be interesting to maybe hear if whether in your own life or another example that comes to mind of what is some of this mindset shift that you're talking about? What becomes possible? Um,
mm,
when we have more of a grasp of these things that culture really hasn't helped us to understand, but when we do the work and we begin to learn, what can open up?
mm. I think I listened to a conversation that you had with what was the name of that philosopher that you shared with
Oh
me?
yeah, with John Russin.
Yes, and he was making talking about, and I don't even know if that's his phrase, but he mentioned something about going with the flow of a river, or like, and stumbling on the rocks or something. I think it was him. Okay, maybe I've, and or actually you can go on a kayak and you can go, like, you're still going with the river, but you have much more, you're not bumping your head everywhere, you're not getting hurt. And I think with the distinctions in modernity helps us, it helps women get a truer identity, because I think that modernity has split women's psyche in a way in which we've become by default dissociated in a sliding scale. Like there's a sliding scale, and I think that maybe you can say men also in some way, but I'd say that it's more compatible to the I think modernity doesn't serve anyone, but it's more compatible to with testosterone. So it's more compatible with a piercing through type of hormone. Then it would only be compatible, modernity is kind of only compatible for women in about 5 days of her cycle, which is when she has testosterone and estrogen close to ovulation. That's about it. All the other times she's kind of like getting there or leaving there or not quite there. So um so in some ways, I think that for women, so I see two distinct kind of healings that need to happen in a way. Maybe healing is not the great word, because I'm also not saying that the healing, like, I don't subscribe to a view that says that the individual can be fully healed. Like I don't believe that in modernity. I think it's like we're swimming in polluted seas. So all of us are going to have some level of pollution and plastic in our bodies, and that's the type of humans we are. So if that's true, then we have to look outside for our elders and our role models, because we to kind of recreate the lineage. Because I think that the younger generations, which have like the technology, exponential tech, and a lot of things going so quickly, to recreate the lineage, that's one way that I'm working with women, is using the frame of Kintsugi, the Japanese, the Japanese art, the Japanese art called Kintsugi.
I don't know a lot about it, no.
Yeah, it's a Japanese art that basically, if you get broken pieces of ceramics, and if you just have the scattered pieces of ceramics, they're just broken scattered pieces and they're rubbish. Like, you can chuck that away, or they can't perform a function together. But if you glue them with a beautiful streak of gold or silver, then all of a sudden you have these beautiful pots of art. I can even share with you an image, and you can have art form. Like, all these broken pieces become art, and they're sold for more expensive than the original vase, because the original vase was an original piece, but then all the work that it took to glue these pieces together with gold turns it into a different thing altogether. So I think that's the healing of humanity at this point, is Kintsugi. And so it's all of us. It's all of us. And it's not me focusing only on my healing. I need to do that a bit to kind of bring some awareness and, become a little bit aware of my own patterns, and so I can meet you. But then if I stay in the loop of just healing myself, I stay in the loop. And the same with you, and the same with every individual piece. And then if we glue our pieces together, then it's like we start making art. So what I'm saying to women is that at this point in culture, so the women that I work with, the women that come to my workshops, they come really open, and it's really beautiful because they come fed up. There's something like, I'm running these workshops now, they're called Embodying the Matriarch at the Age of the Machine. And they're really resonating for women, because it's like, how do you embody an archetype of an older, mature woman if you haven't been prepared to do that? And if your elders, your women elders, um, were not necessarily kintsugi. They were broken pieces, which you are as well. But you're kind of going like, oh, we are a broken piece. We're looking at it. So so then what happens is that we're kind of like trying to figure out, like, there's only one part of the work done at the moment, which is like the recognition, and then the being together, and the reframing, and the looking at your rites of passages. So looking at the first time when you got your period, the first frames that you introjected, the first belief systems of like what it is to shape yourself as a woman. How have you been shaping yourself as a woman? Is that still true? Because then women come to me when they're 50, 45, whatever, 52, 55, and they go like, this woman that's showing up in menopause is the same woman. It's not linear. It's a cycle. She's been cycling her life, and she's harvesting now a lot of her life, which is the menopause phase, is the harvest. If spring is the young woman's life, then the mother is the summer phase of life, then menopause is the harvest. So she's harvesting a whole life pattern. So if we have been contrived by modernity a lot, we're going to harvest that. I'm going to go crazy. We're going to lash out. There's a lot of, things we're going to need to put right. We might need to divorce if we're in a relationship we hated, and we're putting up with a person for 15 years or what. There's so much. And if the woman does that, and then she starts going like, oh, I'm not crazy, I'm entering this new phase of life, which is I'm a baby in that phase. I'm a young matriarch, because then you have, a woman in her 50s is a young matriarch. She's not in her 70s, but because culture is so devoid of elders, we
Mm-hmm.
have to be elders for each other. So that's what I say that the archetype of the matriarch in culture is not going to land on an individual woman because we're all little pieces of broken ceramics. It's going to land in a collective. So I look for elders that have matured the side of themselves more than me. And sometimes they're older than me, sometimes they're younger than me. And I know that I can be an elder for people in different sides. So I can have role models as women, for example, that they're phenomenal women, but because they haven't double clicked in the biological component of women, instead of asking them about their experience of menopause and taking what they're saying as truth, I go like, maybe that's their little broken piece of ceramic. Maybe they haven't quite seen that bit. That's okay. They're still really phenomenal in this bit, and I'll get that bit. And I kind of, that's as best as I can. It's like developing the capacity, and we make mistakes all the time, but developing a capacity to go like, uh, becoming elders for one another, and then so which we need two capacities as far as I can see, and they're almost like contradictory. One is high expectations of each other in some way. Like, I expect a lot of you in a good way. Like, we need to mature for the sake of our young. Yes, we're older, we need to mature for the sake of our young. Simultaneously, a lot of compassion. And like, yes, and we're broken pieces of ceramics. And, sometimes we're gonna mess up and
Mhm.
mess up together, glue two wrong bits and, have a little fight or whatever. Like, that kind of stuff.
Mm. I loved how you said that we don't get to a place of well-being just as individuals, that it really is relational. This is something I use the phrase relational well-being sometimes.
Mm,
And it makes sense that part of how you do that is just by creating relationships. So the elders, and I'd heard you use this phrase before. I don't know if it's exactly how you said it now, but just acknowledging that there's something like a broken lineage. I mean, I think I remember a conversation where I was talking to you about being a divorced father and like, my anxiety about whether I'm cooking healthy food or, and you were telling me something like, well, hey, that really wouldn't have been your role.
mm,
And it doesn't change that this literally is my role right now. But there was something just in that acknowledgement that felt like I really felt seen in that. And it was like, yeah, I think that's there's a value in that. And I like the last thing you said too about high expectations and compassion because, you know, at least you don't it, where we are right now just doesn't look sustainable. It doesn't look, we can't, humanity can't go on this way. So there is something about like we have to be intentional about we're going to do something different. But yeah, it's going to be super difficult. So the compassion is really essential. And something you said in passing, but really struck me was that it just kind of landed with me that what you're describing is that for a lot of women, it's very common just by being a woman in the world today to be confronted with this idea over and over, I'm crazy. Like
mm,
that's the message you get, you're crazy. And then to begin to shed that. Um,
mm,
it's like you said that and I somehow heard it for the first time or heard it in a new way. But what would it be like? That's yeah, like as I listen to you, that's what I'm really sinking into. Like, what if I was just trying to live my life and everything I did that felt natural, the
mm,
response I got is stop being so crazy. I mean,
mm,
if you're not crazy already, that's how to make a person crazy is to tell them over and over that what's feels natural is wrong. And so I can see how deep this goes if that's the
and then you have,
yeah.
sorry to interrupt, but just to add, and then imagine that you have something like psychiatry, which like really doesn't understand a woman's cycle. Like, it doesn't understand, it's not psychiatry. It's like,
Right.
I mean, it's something that then it puts the, so I'm not saying that there are no pathology, that there's no role for medication. I'm not saying that, because in the context of modernity, some of us have been so wounded by modernity and by all the things that are going on, the most sensitive amongst us, that we need to numb some bits to function, and that's fine. But what I'm actually saying is that um, I think psychiatry can be at times dangerous, because it's a lot of the times a menopausal woman or a woman with aspects going on in her cycle is going to be put on medication way before somebody tries to understand her rhythmicity and understand, and if it's a person that knows about it but kind of doesn't have it embodied, it's still really going to expect maybe this is the time that progesterone should be doing this. Like, it's not, it's so far from our medicine, our understanding. So I unfortunately, I'm skeptical of like how it can help. I think that it's a plaster in the problems of modernity, and but I go like, sometimes in the future, in 50 years time, we're gonna look back and go like, what we're doing is like, when we look back and see some of the practices we had in the past and go like, how did we do that to people? I think we're gonna look back into some of our ways of being, and birthing. The birthing industry and psychiatry are two ways that I can see how there's so much pain and trauma that happens for women there, just by not being met and feeling crazy and feeling wrong and feeling, and a lot, and that's to say, a lot of the times I don't even think the doctor, I'm not saying that the doctor doesn't want to try to do the best, it's just that his worldview is completely different. He doesn't inhabit that cycle, because if you zoom out of the cycle, like, just one thing that I play with is like, if you do a cycle with your hand in water over and over again, and you do a line in water, what you have is a different field, a different, and the way Alexander Barr, the philosopher, talks about women being mythos and men being logos and pathos. And I mean, we don't have to go into this kind of definition for this podcast, but it's just like, women, how do women do meta theory from mythos, not from logos? How do women, so there's something very different of our psyches, very different and very juicy, that I don't think is accessible. And I think that it can easily be pathologized when not understood. And then the trusting psyche of a woman reduces herself very quickly. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm just reminded you have a video from CLAB about encouraging women to discover their inner philosopher. Um, yeah, and this. So I'm just noticing the time. We might wrap up somewhat soon, but I realized when I introduced you, I didn't mention you're from Brazil, and now you're living in Australia. I know that just from previous interactions with you, you had a whole journey that included being in India. I think you mentioned being in, was it in Tokyo or you
In
were
Hong Kong.
in Hong Kong? Okay. Um, but so not necessarily to like change the subject. We could just maybe there's a way we could pick up from the last point we just made. But it occurred to just ask, with the sweep of different cultures that you've been a part of, how has that informed your work? And also, you've already made this point that we really are a global tribe now. But so I wanted to just offer you the opportunity to bring in some of the perspective you have, which is very multicultural, and just see what else that might add to our conversation before we end.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. It's nice. It's a nice invitation, because it kind of I think your offer is beautiful, because a lot of the times, if I'm speaking from things that I've been grappling with, it might sound like it hasn't happened to me, but it's like, this is the result of my life. Like, this is my life. Basically, what I teach is my life and continues. My struggles are what I, but I think that living, so there's a few things. One is that I had always lived in big cities before, so brought up in Sao Paulo, then lived in London, Paris, Hong Kong, New York. Always big, 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 lots of people. Like, so like Bonita Roy would say, cosmopolitan self, you know, so that's the modern self, modern mind, the modern woman that introjected the values of modernity. So pretty much that. And then it was on the pill for a long time, and then got off the pill and was like, oh my God, holy smokes, that is crazy. So all of that happened to me. And then now I live off grid in a community in Australia. So that's a most dramatic. I mean, Hong Kong was pretty dramatic. So Hong Kong and India were very dramatic in my life, mostly because they also happened side by side, which is again that desire that I have of juxtaposing polarities. And Hong Kong and India, maybe totally unconsciously at that point, I was manifesting that as a lived experience. So I was living in Hong Kong, and then I split up with my ex-husband, and I studied India. I studied yoga in India, but I needed to keep going to Hong Kong to renew my visa every 3 months.
Mm.
So in Hong Kong, I had this like bohemian lifestyle, and my friends were all party people, and it was a playground for adults and a little bit hedonistic. And in India, I was waking up and doing yoga and practicing meditation. And so it was a complete polarity. Like I would jump from one to the other, and then I would feel myself. What person am I in Hong Kong? What person am I in India? And so that started, that's a long time ago now, but that really I was able to deconstruct a lot of things that modernity had infused in me. Like, if you have more money, you're happier. If you have more power, you're happier. I was like, that doesn't ring true because I'm broke in India. I have and I would have more peace in a certain context. So I started unraveling these sides, but then coming to, it's been more than 7 years now that I'm in a community off grid here. And even though it's a community, again, in a modern context, we're trying to do community, we're learning, and the community is old. It's been around for almost 45 years, but it's still a community that was created from a modern mindset. So we're not like minding each other's business enough that it would create this kind of friction that also creates community in a particular way. So we're like too polite, let's say,
Mm.
in some ways. And so there's that. But I think that living on the land, just completely, that's why I have so much compassion for women in modernity, because now I can see how much bandwidth I'm given just by living in the land. Like if I have a stressful something, I put my feet on the ground, not as a hippie thing. It's just like, I have a few animals and I have chickens, and my day-to-day life is very grounded. So I don't spend hours in traffic. I don't have like neon lights in me all the time. I don't have all of these things that modern people have all the time. That sometimes when I go to big cities and I go like, this is how people live all the time. And that's why people don't have bandwidth. And of course, when I'm there now, I'm not swayed by the current. Most often, I'm not swayed by the current, but I can notice like the landscape of my body, how it's much more like there's much more data coming in. It's much more, I have to put more boundaries for people. I have to create more practice structure. There's all sorts of stuff that I need to do to just be functional. Whereas here, if you're living a life that is, gives myself time. So I'm perimenopausal. So I need to do a yoga nidra every day. If I don't do a yoga nidra every day for 15, 20 minutes, I'm super tired. Like I'm exhausted. And it's the same as a pregnant woman. But in modernity, a lot of women don't have time. They say, I can't do it. And I'm like, I can't believe we can't find 15 minutes of our day to have a nap. I can't believe that we don't see value in that in culture. So I think that just to say that I'm able to compare much more of this stuff, because now it's almost like my community is my palate cleanser. When you eat a lot of chilies and you have a sorbet, so I can palate cleanse, and then I go out, and then I go to Brazil. It's crazy because my family's from São Paulo, and absolute insanity in São Paulo. It's 20 odd million people. And and then I can go there and I can have much more compassion. I go like, it makes sense. People are just in this crazy pressure cooker, and who's gonna have the time to track their cycles? You know what I mean? Like that's why I try to make it as simple as I can to go. This is not gonna take time out of your life. This is gonna help you, like carve time from your body, like carve a little bit of space inside. Like anyway, but you know how hard it is at times.
Well, I love that. I'm just coming back to a number of things you said, like the idea that we could have high expectations for what's possible, but an abundance of compassion. And then what you were just describing, to be really grounded and to really understand that giving myself the time, even if it's like that feeling that I have to carve it out, it increases my capacity. And it makes
Mhm.
me use the word functional, right? We're in situations where the amount of energy that's coming at us is just phenomenal. And yet it is also possible to create those boundaries. It is possible to have those practices. So even to just know that this yoga nidra is a daily thing that, without it, you said it wouldn't be so great, but that that's what you need. Like somehow you discover that's my practice. This is this, and there is, and it gives me a new sense of rhythmicity. So there might be rhythmicity that's in our biology, there might be rhythmicity that's in our environment, but we can also sort of look at the world and say, this wasn't designed exactly for me, but there is a certain rhythm that's
Mhm.
there, in the world around me. There is a certain rhythm that's in me, and maybe there's a little adjustment or a little conscious thing I can do that makes those rhythms begin to sort of cycle together in a more harmonious way. Um, so I thought this is really powerful. I hadn't talked to you in a while. I knew I was going to enjoy it, but I really feel like like you cleansed my palate there, as you were saying. I've been eating too many chilies, so
Oh,
it's time to
mission accomplished.
yeah. Oh, it just strikes me one I'm sort of having that energy of like we're wrapping up, but there was one other thing that I would love to just maybe invite you to speak as a mother. You have two daughters, I think.
Yeah.
But also like the parents. I imagine there'll be some parents listening, like what and I have no doubt you're full of compassion for the modern parent, but what have you learned as a parent, and what would you maybe say as a last word to some of the parents who are listening to us today?
Wow, this is really, I love the invitation, and I go, oh my God, this is a podcast in
Right,
itself,
it's
right?
for sure. We'll have to
Like the
pick it up more
wrapping up
next time,
of
but
like words for a parent is really tricky. But first is like compassion, because a lot of parents and moms beat themselves up. Like this is like I'm failing. So maybe the first thing is like have compassion. Doing things with a broken lineage is difficult. If you're aware of how difficult it is, and once you become aware of this notion of the broken lineage, for some people can be really freeing, because the only way that in tribes new mothers would know how to mother, because they grew up seeing mothers, seeing breastfeeding, seeing people give birth. You just see these events happening in the life around you. And now we're such atomized culture that sometimes a lot of new moms have never hung out with a child. So have a lot of compassion. A lot of us are coming at parenting from this broken lineage. And also, it's unfortunately we can't go with the flow in parenting, because it's unfortunate, but we have to really step into the elderhood and into our community and go like and look at the future and go, wow, what are the mistakes we've done as humanity in the past, and that we know about, and let's just have a look at what's happening. There's a lot of statistics about the technology, exponential tech, how much kids get exposed these days, what's happening with their brains, how they're developing. So there's so much. Even the rate, I was looking at the rate of suicides in girls has increased 167% or something. I don't know if that's just the UK or something, but it was a tremendous statistic. So all these things are real, and 90% in boys. So it's all pretty bleak.
Mm.
But if we kind of like put our feet into like the reality and the pain of that and have compassion and go like, I can't just cruise on this. So it means like I need to be resourced with people I trust. And if I know that there are a lot of the institutions. So for example, being a mother, I can't trust that if I buy food off the shelf, if it's not a vegetable, I have to read the labels. I read the labels of everything. I've read the labels of everything for like 15 years, but it's a hassle. And now I know, so I know the brands, but I'm saying I can't trust. So it's annoying because as a parent, you're like, all of a sudden, as a new mom, you can't trust the medical system to make the choice of birth. As a parent, you can't trust the education system has your back. You have to really be diligent and understand what the teachers are saying. You can't really trust what the doctors are going to say about your child. You can't really trust the diagnosis of in psychiatry or in psychology. So it's really it requires so much capacity that a lot of us don't have, and time. And that's why I'm saying we need Kintsugi. We need to be with the others. We need to go like, May, I trust your judgment with that, and you're more tapped into the education system than me. So maybe I'll kind of follow your lead a little bit. How many hours screen do you give your kid a week? Oh, whatever. Like I think we're trying to navigate, and we're our kids are pushing for more because I see that my kids always wanting more. And now it's the only time that she's like, actually, thank you for not giving me a phone. Like I hate it. Absolutely hate it. But I can see like you're doing a good thing. And it's hard because I'm having to fight like her pressure, peer pressure, and I have it easier than some parents because I am in a bit of a more progressive community. So if you're not in a progressive community, then you have all your kids' friends doing something that it's not great for your kid. So find allies, find people that you can trust and go like my partner. The last thing I'll say, my partner, when people were, I don't know when, but maybe a few years ago, my partner put a thread on WhatsApp or Signal about of the parents and going like, how about can we agree not to give phones to our kids? And let's watch together a movie about technology. And it didn't, not all of it eventuated because there's some split couples and there were different reasoning behind different things. But it has meant that the majority of my daughter's friends don't have social media and phone. So she has friends that do have, but the inner group doesn't. And it makes it a lot easier for me because then I don't have to, that's not an uphill battle. So yeah, these are some things that come up, and
Yeah,
I'm sure
turning
you
to each other
probably
and just,
as a father, you can probably relate to some of the
oh, for sure.
struggles.
No, I can, and I mean, I just want to add again for listeners to really go and check out the resources at CLAB because I think this is a topic that you've addressed there, and just there's a lot of great information there. It's on YouTube, it's on Substack, and I don't know if there's other links and whatnot, but I'll provide all that for listeners. But I really encourage people to check out what Adriana is doing. Um, I think in some ways it's like deceptively simple, but it is deceptive. I think it goes really deep, and anyone I think who's listened all the way through will really feel that. So just a lot of gratitude for you to come on the podcast today, Adriana. I hope we do this again. Really excited to know you and really excited about the work you're doing in the world.
No, thank you, Seth. Yeah, it was a pleasure. I always like jamming with you. It's fun, and we've been talking about recording something for a while, so it was nice to make it happen. Yeah, and I'll come again for sure and have you at C Lab. Yeah.
Beautiful.